Welcome back to the 33 Days of Halloween. Today is day 2, which means we are going to be discussing 1980's Friday the 13th. I will say there are going to be spoilers for this 44-year-old movie, so if you have not seen it and do not want to be spoiled, scroll away now. I'm also going to say, if this is the first that you've seen of the series, make sure that you stay into the end if you're interested on what it's all about. But let's get into the film. Friday the 13th follows a group of young adults as they prep an old campsite that has a dark history of death surrounding it. In 1957, Camp Crystal Lake, or fittingly nicknamed Camp Blood, was the site of a tragic drowning of a young boy named Jason Voorhees. Then, just a year later, 2 camp counselors were brutally murdered on the site as well. As this year's group of counselors hope to reopen the camp after being closed for 2 decades, their plans are interrupted by them being killed one by one, making a death-filled itinerary for Camp Blood. Prior to my rewatch for this series, I was not a fan of this film. I had rewatched it off the back of my hype of watching all of the Halloween films, and I was looking for another franchise to get obsessed with. And I watched this one, I believe it was on my college campus. It was just on my laptop in a dark room by myself with headphones. Maybe not the best of circumstance surrounding a viewing experience. However, I do just want to note that prior to my rewatch, this wasn't one that I had highly regarded. The film was directed by Sean S. Cunningham, who had prior horror experience working on Last House on the Left with horror icon Wes Craven. Going into this film, Cunningham was very heavily inspired by Halloween, which we talked about in day 1, but he wanted to make something more bigger and grander, more of a spectacle than that of Halloween. Next we have Victor Miller, who was the main scriptwriter for the film. After this, Miller would go on to write for several soap operas, and he is noted to being very excited about the writing process for this film, being very intrigued by the idea of crafting his own serial killer. When making the character of Pamela Voorhees, Miller had noted that he was very intrigued with the idea of flipping motherhood on its head. So the story goes that the 2 guys came together in idea to make this film off of the back of the success of Halloween, and along the way, Cunningham was the one who came up with the idea of having it be Friday the 13th. Before checking to see if the name had been trademarked already, Cunningham had rushed out and put an ad in Variety for Friday the 13th. There's a whole kind of rabbit hole you can go down by that story. I'm not going to get into a ton of it here, but it's kind of been mythologized in the slasher community from what I can see. But the main point being is, like Halloween, this film was insanely low budget. For financing, they relied on Phil Scuderi, who had formed Georgetown Productions, who would later go on to finance several of the Friday the 13th films. And then the last person I want to point out is Tom Savini. Tom was in charge of a lot of the makeup and just some of the special effects in general on set. Things like the axe in the face, the slit throats, the kind of deformed Jason look is all credited to him. He too also had prior horror experience working on Romero's Dawn of the Dead. And the reason I wanted to highlight him at the end here is that it was actually his idea to come up with the kind of cliffhanger ending with Jason coming out of the lake. Supposedly, the film was supposed to end with Alice just kind of floating along in the lake. However, Tom had just seen Carrie and was very inspired by the cliffhanger ending in that film, so he wanted to implement something similar in this. First, we have Betsy Palmer, who played Pamela Voorhees. Now, Pamela had a long career up to this point, but at this time, she was mainly filling her time with Broadway. In fact, in an interview with Without Your Head, she described that she was on Broadway when she was originally presented the script. She had read the terms, read the pay, and was originally going to sign on before discovering that it was a horror film. See, at the time, there was kind of a negative connotation with your career being linked to horror. And with her not being in a film since the 60s, she wasn't super into the idea of this being how she kickstarts her career again. However, she decided that she would just read the script and then come to a decision later. After reading the script, she called it, quote, a piece of shit, I believe. So with that, she felt that this film wasn't going to be seen by anyone, just going to come and go real quickly, so she decided to sign on. Later, she notes that she does appreciate what Friday the 13th has done to her career, but I find that very interesting that she was very apprehensive at the start of it. Next, we have Adrienne King, who played Alice Hardy. A good anecdote from her time that I would like to point out is that she expressed how the entire cast kind of bonded on set. Prior to this film, Hardy had performed in small roles on various soap operas. And the main anecdote that I would like to take away from her is in an interview with Greasy Kid Stuff magazine, she expressed how something she remembers most from filming is just the bonds that were created on set. She goes on to also say just the passion that everyone had when making this film. They all wanted to make a real killer movie. Next, we have Kevin Bacon, who played Jack Burrell. Now, Kevin Bacon clearly probably went on to have the biggest career out of anyone in this film. However, prior to this, he had really only been in small theater productions. Something I want to highlight about Jack's character specifically is that he has the best death in the film, in my opinion. Another thing by the great work of Tom Savini is that when the arrow malfunctioned, he would have to manually blow into it for the blood to pump out. Next we have Robbie Morgan, who plays Annie Phillips. Now, Robbie only worked on set for 2 days. However, she expressed that she loved working with the entire crew, with Cunningham and Savini making the latex in her neck for her death. Next, Laurie Bartram as Brenda, who also had soap opera experience prior to this film. Next, we have Janine Taylor, who played Marcy Standler. Taylor had a very short acting career, retiring not long after Friday the 13th. She felt that her role in this film was a fluke, and she sadly didn't think that she had what it takes to make it in the acting business. Next, we have Harry Crosby, who played Bill Brown. Harry is the son of famous American singer Bing Crosby. And Crosby also did not have a very long acting career. He now sits as an investment banker, funny enough. Walt Gorney plays Crazy Ralph, a character that I'm sure we will talk about more in this series. Peter Brower plays the absolute honk Steve Christie. And finally, we have Mark Nelson playing Ned Rubenstein. So for this viewing, me and my girlfriend, we kind of set our mood lighting for when we watch movies. We got our lights, we had a candle set up, the whole nine. And for several reasons, and I'm not exactly sure what I was going through when I first watched this movie, but I had a really, really great time with this viewing. There are some gripes that I still have that we'll get later on. But first, the highlights of this film is just, the first and foremost, I gotta say, is the music. Harry Manfredini is someone that I wanted to highlight just alone away from the creative section. This man absolutely cooks. The opening opening title song is insane in its own. And the way that the music sets the atmosphere throughout this film is really, really something to be more. I would go as far as to say that it competes with the Halloween original soundtrack. Now, the original Halloween soundtrack isn't my favorite of the Halloween series, but for those two films alone, two great soundtracks here. I mentioned his name several times before, but I think Tom Savini does a great job with the makeup and just the special effects on this. The arrow death I alluded to early on is a standout of his. Now, some things I didn't like, I just don't think that the directing in this film is top-notch at all times. There's several camera shots, camera angles that go on for way too long that really take me out of the experience. Chase sequence at the end is one that is kind of silly as it goes on for a little bit too long. But all in all, I gotta say my opinions on this have shifted quite a bit. And now the part that you've been patient for or likely skipped to. So an element that I just thought to add to the series is adding each entry into a tier list. So as you already see at the top in S tier we have Halloween, because to me that is an S tier film. So for context, prior to this film I was thinking it would probably land in either D or C. And while this is all subject to change, I'm putting Friday the 13th in A tier. Thank you so much for checking out 33 Days of Halloween, the show where each day I chronologize, talk about, and just shoot the shit about one of these 3 major franchise movies. If you want to tag along for this, make sure you check out the Halloween episode for yesterday and to tune in tomorrow for Friday the 13th part 2. Okay, bye.